You can't see the whole picture like he can. He's outside of time. So quit looking at life like it's supposed to be perfect or like it's supposed to be fair. Hello and welcome everybody to the 6th episode of Ascension to Depth. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune into this episode. I hope that it finds you well. Before we get started, I do have a quick announcement, very exciting announcement for me personally, and it is that my first book is available on Amazon. It's a 30-day devotional titled Lonely But Not Alone. It's geared toward a young introvert, but I do believe that anybody willing to read it can benefit from it. And so if you are interested, I am going to be putting the link in the description below, and I hope that it is a benefit to you, and I hope that it is a blessing to you just as much as it was to write. I was very privileged to take on this project, and I've been so honored with the feedback that I've gotten. And so if you are interested, again, I'm going to be putting the link in the description below, or if you want to search it on Amazon, Lonely But Not Alone by Joseph De La Rosa. And so I'm really excited to see what this book can do in the lives of so many people. And getting into today's episode, if you missed last week, we talked about burdens and we talked about yokes. We talked about how to be grateful for them. And I really enjoyed undoing the mystery behind yokes and burdens and really changing the perspective of what both of those things are. And so if you missed last week, I do recommend that you go back and listen to it, and I hope that it is a blessing to you as much as it was to me and anybody that you share it with. Speaking of last week, I do have a promise I need to keep. I told the youth group here in Illinois that if they commented on the show, I would display my favorite comment. And so, promise is a promise. Ellie, thank you so much for your comment. Thank you so much for your kind words, and I hope that the show continues to be a benefit to you. Today, I want to talk about how we judge things, because I think that we go about it in the wrong way oftentimes, and I think that we often confuse fairness and justice, and I think that we often describe God as just without really understanding what that means and not really giving him the credit he deserves or the leeway he deserves to make calls in our life, to make judgments in our life. And so I want to start today off with Psalm 89 and 14, and it says that justice and judgment are the habitation of thy throne. Mercy and truth shall go before thy face. I think oftentimes we focus a lot on the mercy and the truth that God provides. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important. I do believe that mercy and truth are essential to being a Christian. I think that we ought to show mercy, but I don't know where I'd be if God hadn't shown mercy to me. And I don't know what I'd be doing if I wasn't exploring the truth that God has hidden in his word, hidden in a relationship with him. Things that you can only discover in a proper relationship with him. So I'm not saying that those things are not important, but I think that we often forget that he inhabits justice and judgment. There is an order to things that we must follow, and I've grown interested in this topic because we often say it. We say it all the time that God is just, and we don't really give him as much leeway as we should if we really believe that he was just. And I had the privilege to talk to a couple cops on the subject of justice, and they gave me some really good insight into how man views the term justice. And they all pretty much agreed that humanity, isn't really gonna ever experience what it means to have true justice, especially in today's system of justice. And talking about the criminal justice system specifically, we live in a time where the lack of proper action is incentivized, and justice in this system would require something like restitution in kind, but we live in a world where the things that are evil are called good and the things that are good are called evil. And so we're coming to this fork in the road where we know that Jesus is coming back and things are getting worse, but we forget sometimes that God is just, and it's very difficult to look at God as just, especially when things are getting worse. And so I think it's very important for us to understand this facet of God, because God is a God of order, and the worst thing that we can do, especially in times like these, is step out of order, to step out of alignment with God's authority. And I think we often do that when we overstep, and we overstep by trying to take on the title of judge, take on the role of judge in our lives, whether it be judging people or things that we're going through in our life. We often overstep when we think that our judgment is better than God's, when we can call something just when he has deemed it unjust, or we can call something unjust that he has deemed just. And I think that it has to do with trust. I believe that the people who have trouble allowing God to deem what is just and unjust in their life are the same people who don't trust God completely. And on one hand, I understand because it's very hard for us to relinquish control of our lives. It's very difficult for us to give up that sense of right and wrong, thinking that our understanding isn't adequate. It's very hard to come to that understanding. And I think a lot of the overstepping that we do has to do with the fact that we don't trust God as much as we say we do. We like to think that our understanding of good and evil is the understanding of good and evil, that everybody would understand good and evil if they saw things the way we do. And it causes division not only amongst ourselves, but from God, because we're using our own standards to justify things that God has put in place. And I think it has to do with trust. I think it has to do with the fact that people don't trust God as much as they think they do. And so I think we need to understand this facet of God, understand this characteristic of God being just. And that in turn will allow us to trust Him enough to deem what is just for us. And so let's get into justice. And first, let's recognize the lack of justice in our humanity. Let's recognize the lack of justice that we hold, because no human can ever really understand what true justice is. Because we're all human, we can only observe what is and what was. We can't judge ourselves properly. It's why we need to be very careful with how we judge. We have to be very careful with how we deem things in our lives. And especially when it comes to our own ways, because Proverbs 21:2 says, every way of a man is right in his own eyes. Whether it's you criticizing yourself or complimenting yourself, regardless of whichever one you do, the Bible says that every way of a man is right in his own eyes. So if you're criticizing yourself, tearing yourself down, making yourself think that you are not adequate enough to follow in the steps of God, you may think that that's right, but God has not deemed that as just. The same on the other end, if you think yourself higher than the ways that God has put in your life, think yourself higher than the truth that we all know, the truth of the Bible, think yourself better than that. Your way may seem right to your own eyes, but it's not what God has deemed just. Our judgment is subjective, meaning that we have no real understanding of how to judge and how to be just, because our perception is bent to our preferences. And even the things that we find wrong are bent to the understanding that we have of right and wrong. So we shouldn't consider ourselves wise enough to, one, ever be truly just, and two, consider our judgment the highest of all. We're all going to judge things. We're all going to make decisions. We're all going to come to conclusions. We're often going to get to those conclusions faster than we should have. But always make sure that our judgment doesn't outrank God's. It doesn't outrank a pastor. It doesn't outrank the authority that God has placed in our lives. It doesn't outrank what His word says. Your judgment is subjective to you. So you need to be very, very careful with how you allow your judgment to affect your perception of people and of the things that you're going through in life. And I believe that's why Matthew 7 verses 1-3 says, "Judge not that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye?" You see, it's a warning to not judge carelessly, to not just go around making judgments that you don't understand, things that you don't have any idea of, to not jump to conclusions, to not hold grudges, don't hold mistakes over people, don't look at your life and think that everything is God's fault. Don't look at your life and think that you're better than anybody else, because the same carnality that you make those judgments with, the same carnality that you jump to conclusions with and hold grudges with and hold mistakes over people with and deem your life unfit or too fit, is the same carnality that will be judged against you later. The same level of carnality will come around to judge you again. And I heard a saying once that people want justice for everyone else, but grace for themselves. But the only way to receive grace is if you judge with grace, looking at your life and being grateful for the burdens that we go through, looking at your life and being grateful for the blessings that you have, looking at your life and showing grace to the people who have wronged you, showing forgiveness to the people who owe you an apology. And it's very difficult to do. And so that's why it's very important for us to lean on the judgment of God. Because if we let him do the judging for us, or if we lean on his judgment more than we lean on our own, and show God's grace to people rather than showing our judgment to people, we're ensuring that God's grace is what comes back and judges us later. And so if you take that warning in Matthew 7, it shines a different light on Matthew 5:44 through 48. The Bible says, "But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans do the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." This passage right here is showing us that we have a choice in the judgments we make, in the decisions we make, in the conclusions that we come to. You can either love your enemies or you can hate your enemies. You can curse the people that curse you or bless the people that curse you. You can do good to them that hate you, or you can hate them right back. But you're not becoming like God in that process. The judgments that you're making are taking you further away from God, ensuring that that same carnality is going to come back and bite you. But instead, salute the people that wrong you. Love them that hate you. Show the grace that you want shown to you. The route to becoming like God involves you showing grace to those who don't deserve it. And this isn't me saying just lay down and get hit and take abuse. I don't think that anybody should be scared to defend their faith or defend themselves. But this is me saying don't go using your preconceived notions, your preconceived opinions or emotions to judge someone when they need grace. Don't go looking at your life like it's the worst life on earth, like it's hell on earth, because you're not happy with the things that you're going through, because you're not happy with the current state of life that you're in, and thinking that life isn't fair, which is an odd concept to begin with. When you think about fairness, we often get put in the wrong mindset when it comes to fairness because we use it as a comparison game. We look at our lives and then we compare it to other people's lives or other people's blessings. We look at our blessings and look at other people's blessings, our struggles and look at other people's struggles, and then we think it's not fair, but that's only because we're comparing it to other people. We're comparing it even sometimes to what we've done. Like, oh, I've done X, Y, and Z for God. I should have X, Y, and Z. It's not a transaction. Life is not a transaction. And some people ask why God blesses so many bad people. God allowing people to have things is not the same thing as God blessing somebody. And God allows us to make choices and reap the benefits or consequences of those choices, but that's not the same thing as having a blessing from God. There are people living paycheck to paycheck who experience more of God's blessings than any billionaire does. And in order to find that fairness or justice in life, you can't look at this life itself. For everybody who's so discontent with their lives, anybody who's so unhappy with their lives, it's not a matter of what you have and what you don't have, what you're satisfied with and what you're not satisfied with. It's how you're looking at the things that are happening to you, the things that are happening around you. And if you can't look beyond this life itself and look beyond the moment that you're in, you do yourself a disservice. That's why I believe it says in 2 Corinthians 4:17, it says, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us far more exceeding an eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." If we focus on this life, we lose sight of where justice really exists. Justice is an eternal element of existence, something that only God truly understands how to be when it comes to being just. It's why we can't comprehend justice in its fullness. Put your eyes on God because He's the only one who can understand what it is to truly be just. Get your eyes on heaven. Live your life in accordance to God's will and let Him be the judge of what you should do or not do, or what's just in your life and not just in your life, what's fair and what's not fair, because you can't see the whole picture like He can. He's outside of time. So quit looking at life like it's supposed to be perfect or like it's supposed to be fair. So many people get so hung up on how life makes them feel, as if life isn't worth living because they're not as happy as they once were, or less successful than so and so, or more problems than other people, hurt by others, or unsatisfied with who they are or who they're with. You're focusing too much on the things that will pass. And of course, you don't think that the things that you have and the things that you're living out are not fair because you're so focused on the present moment. And some have the audacity to even think that it's God's fault or that He has failed them or that He's not fair and just. You don't know what blessings God is preparing for you in the future, the things that you can't see yet. We don't know what God is doing in the realm beyond time, beyond this existence. And we don't know what's going to happen next year, next month, next week. We don't really even know what's going to happen tomorrow. We can make predictions, but we don't really know. And oftentimes we cost ourselves the blessing, the things that God has for us, because we didn't show the grace that we needed to get where God needed us to go. I love how Deuteronomy describes God's justice, and it kind of highlights why we're not just, why we're not capable of being just. Deuteronomy 32:4 says, He is the rock, His work is perfect, for all His ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is He. Look at the way it's structured, because it's like it's saying, here are the things that make God just and right. First, we have He's a rock. He's stable, unmoving, able to be built upon. Then it says He's perfect. Everything He does is done as it was supposed to be done, without mistakes, flaws, or impurities. Then it says that all His ways are judgment. All His ways are analyzed. All His ways are measured. He is a God of truth and has no iniquity. Therefore, He is just and right. We are not all of those things, if any. Therefore, we can't truly be just like God is just. And so we have no business looking at our lives that He has blessed us with and saying that this isn't fair and that's not fair and they should have this and they shouldn't have this. We should have this and we shouldn't have this. We don't have the capability to truly say what is just. We don't have the capability to say that this is not fair because we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know what rains are going to fall on us, what sun is going to shine on us. We don't know. And so we shouldn't be the ones making the call. And we should be very, very careful with what we say and what grace we show or refuse to show, because the grace we want is only going to come when we show it. It's only coming back when we give out the grace that we want to receive. And so we need to be really careful how we perceive life, because God has allowed life to be imperfect to a bunch of imperfect people, which is about as just as it gets. Take on a lens of thanksgiving and grace before you let cynicalness or bitterness define what your quality of life is or the quality of someone else's life is. Let God be the judge. Let what you find just and unjust be ran through the filtration system of what God finds just and unjust. And if they don't match up, adjust your perception, because God's perception encompasses both the past, present, and future. We can't hope to know what the future has, and we can only go so far back in the past. And so justice to us is what happens in the moment. So lean your judgment and lean what you find just and unjust on the one who can see it all. And you just do what you were intended to do, which is serve Him. If you can ensure that you serve Him before you make any sort of judgments, before you do anything rash, before you do anything against a brother, before you do anything against yourself, if you just ensure that you serve God and you show God's grace and love, you ensure that He is there to serve you. You ensure that His grace is there to serve you. You ensure that His love is there to serve you. Why? Because you used it in your own life. If you judge, you will be judged. If you show grace, you will be shown grace. And so we need to be very, very careful with how we go about our lives, taking on the role of judge when we shouldn't be, and deciding whether or not things are just and unjust. I hope that I've stirred something in you in the sense that you shouldn't just believe your eyes. You shouldn't just believe your heart. You shouldn't just believe your mind. There's a higher mind. There's a higher way of thinking. There's a true way of thinking, something that we're not really ever going to understand until we get to heaven one day. And even then, who knows if we're ever going to really understand the true justice of God. But we do know that justice and judgment inhabit His throne. Thank God we're shown mercy, and thank God we're shown truth. But let us not forget that justice and judgment are a big part of who God is. And so let's stay in order. Let's stay in alignment with Him, so that when justice does come, when judgment does come, we're shown grace and not carnality. We're shown grace and not reciprocation of our flesh. And so with all that being said, I hope that this episode was a benefit to you. I hope it got you to think about some things, maybe some things that you may have judged too early, maybe some things that maybe you have put into a negative light that were supposed to be in a positive one, things that God has put in your life to build you that you think are hurting you, and you've just jumped to the wrong conclusions. I pray that you follow God's process in all the things that you go through, and I pray that this episode has shown you that God is the one who should be making the final calls, not us as human beings. We should be totally dependent on God's judgment. And so share this episode with somebody that you think will benefit from it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment, and I might just display it. But thank you everybody who supports the show. I wish you all well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. God bless you, and Godspeed.